Democracy, Bridging Facts and Norms.
So my name is Philippe Van Parijs. I'm a philosopher. I teach mainly at the University of Louvain in Belgium, in charge of something called the Hoover Chair of Economic and Social Ethics, which is a group of people now with different disciplinary backgrounds and all interested in aspects of what could be called political philosophy in a broad sense, and with a particular emphasis, but not exclusive, on economic matters. In my own personal work, I've been working quite a bit on various aspects of social justice. One of my first books was simply called Qu'est-ce qu'une société juste? What is a just society? One of my other books was an answer to that question, the answer I proposed to that question, and summarized in the slogan that forms the title of that book, Real Freedom for All. And then I've been exploring other aspects of justice, in particular, more recently, the linguistic dimension of it. And so one of my other more recent books is called Linguistic Justice for Europe and for the World. In connection with this work on justice, but also related to public debates, I've been interested and active for quite some time now in the future of the welfare state, and in particular the question of whether it would be a good idea to introduce an unconditional basic income. And I think it would be a good idea.
And you've been pretty engaged in not only on the academic sphere, but also in public debates about the basic income. How does these two fields of expertise work together, and why did you feel the need to not only do academic arguments, but also to engage in public discussions?
Yes, but this applies more generally. I mean, because my involvement also in public debate is not only about the basic income or the future of the welfare state, it's also about the future of my country, Belgium, which has sort of a history and also current situation, which in some respect is conflictual. I think our institutions are not bad, but they need improving in various ways. So that's certainly one area in which I'll continue to be active. Also the future of the European Union is something that's very close to my heart and to my brain, so in which I'll an issue in which I'll keep being involved. The future of my own city, which and Brussels, which at the same time is the capital of the European Union. All these issues are also things, not only basic income, which I have been involved more in recent years than a longer time ago, and in which I'll remain involved. And for me, there is a complementarity between my more academic job and then this public involvement, but in both directions. I think that the thinking I'm able to do in the ivory tower of the academic world, and also in that capacity, by moving around the world and meeting people like you, or participating in this workshop and listening to other people, all this is, of course, relevant for my political involvement. It helps getting a sense of perspective, guiding the actions, the proposals that need to be made, in my view. But it also works the other way around, and certainly my academic work is also informed by my activity. For example, in my book about linguistic justice, well, it contains a number of anecdotes or real-life issues which I became acquainted with as part of my more public intellectual activity, let's put it that way.
Exactly. One question I wanted to ask you is how do you get started on topics, and what role does empirical research play in your theoretical work, if any? Or is it more this dialogue that you can have with people outside academia that feeds your the empirical aspects of your own research?
Yeah, well, the way in which I get started on any of the issues I've been working on in the 40 years or so of my professional life is the way I think any sort of research should get started. That is, you start with a question to which you have no answer, which you find important enough for you to devote some months or some years of your life to. And that's what I also tell young researchers around me, or the people who did a doctorate with me, or other people at the Hoover Chair in Louvain. Start with the questions which you find important and that will keep you going for a number of years, and to which you don't know in advance what the answer is. If you know it in advance, there is no point in continuing. If you don't find it a sort of thrilling question, forget it, do something else. And then try to find the right answer to that. And of course, for many issues, you can't just find the answer if you rely on just one discipline. And that is, of course, the case for many of the issues I've been trying to deal with. So if you want to answer the question of what our welfare state should look like in the future, of how redistribution should be organized, if you want to give advice or take a stance on language policy, well, you need to go into economics, you need to go into political science to some extent, you need to go into sociolinguistics in order not to be naive about all these issues. And you can do so thanks to the fantastic sort of treasure of multidisciplinary competence which you have in our universities. Universities are a fantastic treasure in this respect, and if you have good relations with colleagues, if you they will help you sort of focus very quickly on what the part of the literature that's good and relevant to your work. When you venture into making some statements on some area which is not within your very narrow range of expertise, where you have people who can give you feedback on that. So the workshop we've just had is a good example of that. And so it's possible to be bold in some respects, make statements that may turn out to be naive, but thanks to the feedback of colleagues, researchers around you, in your immediate surroundings or around the world, this is something that can be fruitful and lead to the best possible answers to the thrilling, important, urgent questions which we ask ourselves.
Do you think then, in addition to having the help of colleagues to find the right literature and to get out of this possible naivety of starting with a topic, we could also start projects together? Or is it better to stay each in one's area and to collaborate only on certain common topics and ask for the advice of other researchers in other disciplines? Or can we start projects together?
I think there is no general answer to that question. It really depends on the particular question. It depends on how easily it is for you to find colleagues who might be interested in more or less the same question as you. And it may also simply depend on your personal temperament. And so some people will feel happier working on their own, and then after a while subjecting what they have produced to their colleagues. Other people need the stimulation of other people with whom to work from the start. So I really think there is no general answer to that question.
You wrote in your book, Just Democracy, the Rawls Machiavelli program, that political philosophers should tell the democratic majority what it should decide and why, including as regard institutions that will modify its own functioning and lead to it take decisions different from what it otherwise would. That seems like a huge responsibility for political philosophers, and I was wondering how exactly to implement that.
Yes, a huge responsibility. It was also a very long sentence, but yes, it's something I still agree with, and so I think role as political philosophers is partly to answer the question of what good institutions would be for the sort of societies and the sort of world in which we live today. And good institutions must in part just institutions, not the only virtue of good institutions, but like John Rawls, I believe that the first virtue of social institutions is justice. And so we need to reflect on that and come out with sort of answers, well-argued answers to this question. And then it's not for philosophers to impose that on society, but we are given by our societies the freedom and the leisure, therefore also the responsibility to contribute to the sort of dialogue of society with itself about how to reform its institutions, what decisions to take. And some of these reforms will concern political institutions, and the way in which political institutions are shaped will, of course, affect the decisions that will come out of these political institutions. And so we need, that's the Rawls Machiavelli program, we need to clarify our minds by talking to each other, by subjecting our conjectures about what justice requires to discussion by others. We need to come to an answer about the ultimate objective to be pursued by our institutions. But that's the Rawls aspect in the Rawls Machiavelli program. And then the Machiavelli aspect consists in thinking about how we should best shape our political institutions, so our institutions that determine how collective decisions are being taken, how we should best shape these institutions so that social justice, or including global justice, is being pursued as effectively as we think is possible.
And then, can we do provocation as political theorists? We discussed a bit in the workshop about Nozick's arguments, for example, which are on the one hand useful tools for further reflection, but can they also be dangerous to a certain extent if they're taken too seriously by the wrong part of the population, for example? Can political theory harm in some way? And how to avoid it?
Yes, I think everything can harm, but I think there is a role for philosophers in general to sort of explicate some or express puzzles, difficulties, genuine intellectual difficulties. And you mentioned Robert Nozick. He was really excellent at doing that. And so that he started thinking himself about John Rawls' theory as it was still being prepared. So there were already colleagues before the theory of justice, Rawls' theory of justice was published, and we had discussions with Rawls also in that period. And then not so long after the publication of Rawls' theory of justice, he published his own Anarchy, State and Utopia, which is a very stimulating book. I don't think at all it's anything like a plausible alternative to Rawls, nor a book of the same historical importance for political philosophy, but it's a very stimulating book, and it provokes by pointing to a number of puzzles that need to be addressed, and a number of other philosophers do that, and I think it's important that they do so. Most of them don't have the slightest impact on public discussion, let alone on public policy, and so much that's for the better. I mean, but of course, you also have political philosophers in a broad sense that have had a major impact on policy and on the general shape of our societies today, which you may regard as being at least partly negative. One major example, in many respects a brilliant example, is Friedrich Hayek. He had, I think he was an extremely bright economist and philosopher. That's not at all like Nozick, a sort of musketeer who liked just to make puzzles. He really had a vision about what, in his view, was a good society. It is a remarkable text, a short text he published in 1949 on intellectuals and socialism, where he says that, to his regret, the world was becoming more and more socialist, as well in the United States as in Europe, because socialists had had and been bold enough to formulate utopias. And you need a utopian vision in order to mobilize people in the service of a certain conception of society. And he said his role, therefore, was to concoct and formulate a sort of liberal utopia, which could be offered as an attractive alternative to socialism. And he did that, and he published Constitution of Liberty, which is a very impressive, interesting, important book that initially had very little impact, and then in the end turned out to be at the core of the so-called neoliberal doctrine. And so in this sense, you can have certainly political philosophers who have an impact on the world that today maybe Hayek himself would regard it as certainly not fully positive.
And can we avoid that in any way?
I don't think you can avoid it in any way. You can limit this possibility by having public discussion. So just talk to each other, and talk to each other by sort of implicitly or explicitly accepting the constraint that whatever you propose must be justifiable to all the people affected, regarded as free and equal. I think that's, if you have that, then in a way the functioning of democracy, or when it doesn't function too badly, keeps driving us in this direction. And so we are forced to make proposals to our societies, and increasingly to our continent at the European level, or to our world, that can be justified to all in our countries, to all in the world, and to all, including the future generations. And it's only thanks to this remarkable ability our species has, and no other species has, which is to communicate with each other and listen to each other, and thereby sort of laboriously develop some sort of sense of justice, and that can go beyond our immediate community. Thanks to that we can have hope for a more just future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you to you.
Brought to you by democracynet.eu.